Hey everyone, Chris Carter here from the Locked On Steelers podcast. We got Alan Saunders on, and we're going to be talking about the continued waiting game of the Steelers. Do they get Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers? We talk about that, the new running back that they signed, and whether or not George Pickens and D.K. Metcalf actually can work together. All here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we are your team every day. And as I said, we are joined by the man himself, Alan Saunders. He's back on the show. Alan, we are still playing the waiting game. We are no closer to knowing who the Steelers quarterback is than we were basically all off season, other than we know that it's not Justin Fields or Daniel Jones or Sam Darnold. They are all signed by other teams. But it is down to the two older veterans who, I will say, still in the history of this show, the most watched YouTube episode that we have ever published was back in 2021, when none other than Doug Whaley came on this show and during Ben Roethlisberger's last season said Art Rooney is going to want to sign either Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers once Ben retires, and that blew up our numbers. And there is now a chance that the Steelers could have had both in a span of 2 years.
There you go. I think it's a good chance, too. I think he's the most likely of the two, although I don't really know. It doesn't seem like anybody knows what's going to happen. I think he wants a lot of money, and I don't think that's the object of the Steelers' game plan at the quarterback position this offseason. But, Chris, there's a lot of angst in the fan base. And I want to address the angst.
Let's address the
maybe
angst.
soothe some angst. And to do that, I've brought a visual aid. I don't usually do this. I'm sorry to you podcast listeners. I may have Chris play by.
I'll describe it.
So this is what was the Steelers' options were.
It's a bunch of cards. It's kings.
It's four kings, right, from a deck of cards. This is what the Steelers had as an option at quarterback. And then this one and this one went away, and here's what's left. It's just the same. They're all the same. There's no, it's just different flavors of the same. They have four mediocre quarterback options. I probably should have used eights instead of
that's where you messed up. I was thinking you should have used a 7 or something.
The kings are better looking.
They are better looking.
They more obviously describe the individual differences. Stylistically, Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, Sam Darnold, vastly different. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the quality of quarterback play you should expect to get out of them in 2025, we're middle of the table here no matter what. Nobody is moving the needle one direction or the other. When people are freaking out about how could the Steelers possibly attract a wide receiver without knowing who the quarterback is, that's like when you go to Hertz and they're like, yeah, I'm going to rent a compact. You don't care if it's a Toyota Corolla or a Honda Civic. You know what you're getting. It's going to be either way. Nobody's that picky about which brand of they're getting. It's not a big deal. They'll get one of them. I'm pretty sure it'll be okay. It's not going to be good because none of them are good, but it'll be okay.
But see, this has been my point all week, is that even when Justin Fields was on the table, none of these quarterback options were going to make the Steelers Super Bowl contenders now or in the future. The whole point was to find a quarterback who you could say, hey, play the system. We're developing an offensive line, hope to develop a better run game, and we got you two big dogs at wide receiver. Maybe one of them will be gone. We'll figure that out. But you got two big dogs, and you got a tight end, and this team is still about its defense. All you got to do is play to the system, make the smart throws, don't turn the ball over, and you'll do your job. And the Steelers will probably be around the same place that they've been the last few years. If they get a few balls thrown their way, maybe they win a couple more games, win a division. Who knows? They could take a slight step up. But the whole point of all of this was to set up a roster for when you do eventually get the franchise quarterback. And it doesn't have to be in the draft. You could find your version of Matt Stafford next year. I'm not saying that that's readily available, but instead of trying to go all in right now and overpay for someone that's going to, in a way that's going to set you back for years, Get you the guy that can hold it down for now, provide solid play, and buy you time until you make that move. And something that you wrote at SteelersNow.com, and I discussed with Nick Farabaugh on yesterday's episode, was it looks like Omar Khan is setting up the resources for the Steelers to be able to do that. Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, I wrote this at SteelersNow.com on Monday morning that it very much looks like, Tuesday morning. It very much looks like Khan is setting up the Steelers to get a serious haul in terms of compensatory draft picks for the 2026 draft. The compensatory pick formula is complicated, but basically when you sign a countable free agent, it goes on one side of the ledger, and when you lose one, it goes on the other. And if you have more losses than additions, you get extra picks, depending on how highly paid those players were. So, the Steelers have a very highly paid player like Dan Moore leave, that's going to get them a third-round comp pick slot. As long as they don't sign someone who will offset that in the process, they'll get an extra third-round pick next year. I have the Steelers at the end of the day on Monday with third, fourth, fifth, and sixth-round comp picks. You can only get 4. That's about the best you can possibly do. And if you added those together, that'd be enough to move up from about 20 to about 5 in the draft class. Now, I'm not saying one team is going to want 30. You have to figure equivalent value here using the trade value chart, et cetera. But like, that's enough right there, what they've got in comp picks, to solve the problem single-handedly of being stuck in the middle, of their forever insistence on, we don't ever want to take a step back intentionally. We always want to put the best team on the field we can, but also the necessity of needing a high draft pick to get a potential franchise quarterback. You saw what the Bills did with Josh Allen. You saw what the Chiefs did with Mahomes. They traded up to get their guy. Maybe it's Stafford. Maybe you're trading for somebody else's guy, but you need that draft capital to do it. And he's got like half again as much draft capital as normal coming to him in 2026. And when you look at the way they're signing free agents and targeting free agents, Darius Slay, cut by the Eagles, won't count for the formula. Aaron Rodgers, cut by the Jets, won't count towards the formula. D.K. Metcalf, that's a trade, won't count towards the formula. So it seems very clear that this is a part of the plan, that they are loading up assets in the 26th draft so they can use them to make a big move to get a quarterback.
That's where I'm at, man. I am right now. I am all about that plan, because again, you could do this as a plan to figure out your guy. That way you can be as aggressive. Like this year, there's 2 guys everyone's talking about: Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. And sure, there's Jackson Dart and all those guys, but if next year there's a better version of where there's 2 or 3 guys that you think are legitimate potential franchise quarterbacks, and you're going to have to trade up to get them, and you still finish 10-7 in the 10-7 range, so you're picking in the low 20s, and you know that they're not going to get to that range. This gives you that ammunition to go up and get that. Or at least if you don't use the comp picks themselves, you use, like you said, other picks that you have, and then just rely on the comp picks to fill in the picks behind. You're trading up to get that quarterback, because again, I really think the priority for this season, just like it should have been last season, I think it was, is you are setting the stage to fill as many holes in your roster for this foreseeable future, at corner, at O-line, at D-line, at receiver. You're trying to set it up so that next year, if you trade up to get that first round quarterback in the top 5 or wherever it is, you won't feel as bad for not picking in the next 50 picks after that, because you've solidified so many other things in your roster.
And you're giving your rookie quarterback the opportunity to hit the ground running and make an impact. You want to have, Jane Daniels and not Caleb Williams. You want to have C.J. Stroud and not Bryce Young, right? You want to have the rookie quarterback that is able to have immediate success. You got to put a good roster around them to do that. That's why tanking doesn't work, because you tank to get the quarterback, but you have to build a terrible roster to get the quarterback. And then it takes a long time to build the terrible roster up to play around him. Look, the Bengals tanked to get Joe Burrow. They made the Super Bowl once. They also missed the playoffs a bunch. Hasn't really worked out great for them. This is a better way to go get your franchise quarterback.
And it's the way that set up Ben Roethlisberger for his Super Bowl success. It's the only time
they didn't tank in 2004. They had a good team that just happened to have a bad year. They weren't tanking.
They weren't tanking. They had a lot of the building blocks in place. Tommy Maddox was just a very bad quarterback, and it set them back, and they had a lot of other things kind of fall through that year. But they were absolutely building towards something, and that's what you're supposed to do. And I think you look at the Chiefs, the prime dynasty of this current era. They didn't tank to get Patrick Mahomes. They were the 2 seed in the playoffs that year before they drafted Patrick Mahomes. That's what they're trying to do right now. I think the Steelers, like you, whoever they get, and Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, that's not the overall story of the Steelers franchise. That is the line. Now, I before we go, I do want to address the actual question. Alan, I am of the mind, like, if you're asking me, I'm saying just get Russell Wilson. Stop playing around. If Aaron Rodgers is going to take another 2 darkness retreats before he tells you what he wants to do at quarterback, just sign Russ. He knows your system. I know that there's people in the locker room that don't like him now. I know there's Arthur Smith that don't like him, all that other stuff, blah, blah, blah. Get over it. Yeah, you're all veterans. This is business. Bring him in. He knows your system. You now have 2 guys that can go and win the deep balls that he can moonball to. Build your team. Tell Russ, hey, cannon on the things that annoy people. Just stick around, and things will be fine for the next 2 years, and get this over with. Are you more on the side that they should be pursuing Aaron Rodgers for whatever money that he's asking for right now, or do you have a cap where you're like, you know what? At this point, just move on?
No, I think my answer of who I want is whoever's cheaper. To be perfectly honest, again, like, we'll go back to they're worth the same. They're the same amount. Okay, no one cares whether you have the Red King or the Black King. Okay, doesn't matter. All right.
What's wrong with Black Kings? Sorry, it was right there.
I'm more of a hearts guy than spades. I don't know. I got nothing. So. Yeah, well, whoever's cheaper, but also, I'll say this. I don't think there's an advantage to being in a rush. Okay. And I honestly think Steelers should be okay letting the Giants make this choice for them. Because if the Giants decide, whoever's left has no leverage. You got that's one starting job. You can take it or leave it. We'll give you $10 million. I think that's honestly an okay place for them to be. So I don't think they should be in a hurry.
You know, that's a really good take right there from Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. I like that. I hadn't thought of it that way. I've been thinking, man, just tell Russ, hey, here's 20. Just let's get this over with. But the idea of, you know what, Giants, you go ahead and sign Aaron Rodgers for the big dollars. Then Russell Wilson, if you want to start somewhere, this is it, buddy. So take this offer. Because no one else is even going to offer you this, and you're gonna this is your chance. That's a really good point. Because to me, Alan, that's the whole point. Don't overpay for this. You knew you were getting a mid quarterback no matter what. So instead of overpaying for the mid quarterback, just pay the mid rate for the mid quarterback, and then build your roster around that. And I think you and I are on the same page with what they need to do there. So speaking of building the roster, they did sign a running back in Kenneth Gainwell. I want to talk to Alan about that. We'll do that next here, as well as answer other big things going on for the Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, we'll remind you this episode is sponsored by Betterhelp. Taking care of your mental health can feel like a big investment, but it's just as important as taking care of your body. Traditional in-person therapy can cost anywhere from $100 to $250 per session, but with Betterhelp, you can save up to 50% per session. BetterHelp offers a flat fee for weekly online therapy sessions, making professional support more accessible and affordable. With over 30,000 therapists and over 5 million people helped, it's the world's largest online therapy platform. You should treat therapy like self-care. We spend money on gym memberships and healthy food. Why not invest in our mental well-being too? Therapy isn't just for tough times. It's a great tool for learning coping skills and setting boundaries. BetterHelp makes it easy to fit therapy into your schedule, whether you're working, parenting, or always on the go. You don't have to go through a major crisis to benefit from therapy. Sometimes it's just about having someone to talk to. Your well-being is worth it. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter, Alan Saunders here on the show. Alan, let's talk about Kenneth Gainwell, the new Steelers running back. He is signed with the team. Still looking for details here. This happened late was it Tuesday? The days are all blurring together, man. But this happened late Tuesday. Kenneth Gainwell, a player that if you're a Steelers fan, you're probably familiar with because he cooked Dante Jackson pretty badly when the Eagles played them this year. What does he do for this running back room, and does he impact? Like, how does he impact the plan at running back right now?
What does he do, Chris? What does he do?
What does he do?
He gains well. That is what he does. He gains well.
If I could legally Yoshi bonk you without trademark problems in this show, I would do it.
It's way better to have a running back named Gainwell than a quarterback named Pickett. Can we agree on that?
Yes, that's very true. Yeah, we can agree on that.
Okay. Listen, Kenneth Gainwell. I'm not sure if he likes Kenneth or Kenny. I don't know. I've seen both. We'll have to ask him. That'll be at the top of the to-do list here. Or maybe I'll ask one of my Eagles reporter friends. He is a very small, very fast running back, 5'9", good straight line speed. Basically, your traditional third down back type in that West Coast offense. If you think of Darren Sproles, who was an Eagle before him, lots of guys have had that role over the years, all the way back to Brian Mitchell with the Giants. But like he's little, he's fast, he get to the edge if you run. He's a good receiver and a really good kickoff returner.
That's where I was going.
A great fit for what the Pittsburgh Steelers do with Arthur Smith in the offense. A great backup for Jaylen Warren. Feel like they're pretty much one-to-one in terms of what you can do with one, you can do with the other. Don't have to make a change. Jaylen goes down. You're calling all the same plays for Gainwell that you were for Warren. And then I think a far better kick returner than Cordell Patterson. Whether that's, I'm assuming they're not going to want Warren to return kicks if he's a starting running back. So They're really going to need two kickoff returners. So I don't know if that'll be with Patterson or instead of Patterson, but he'll be a weapon back there in the kickoff return as well.
I'm feeling you on that. And you and I were talking about the potential of doubling down in running back in this draft class, getting a traditional running back like Caleb Johnson or Damian Martinez, and then getting a speedster running back like, Aiden Tootin or just one of the fast guys that were in this draft class. And
Marcus Yarns, by the way, who is from Delaware. Now that this has happened, I will bet a lot of money that Philadelphia drafts Marcus Yarns because this is just Kenny Gainwell all over again. And he's from Delaware, right down the road. So that's going to happen. You can mark that one down.
Well, there you go. Future picks right there from Alan Saunders. But Alan, I want to talk about how it fits Arthur Smith's offense, right? Because we talked about the outside zone and the importance of run and how it runs and how it didn't always fit Najee because that's just not his. He's more of a power gap runner. What can this do for the Steelers offense if they do have three running backs that do fit that style? Is that something that can develop a dangerous run game for the Steelers, or will it kind of just be like, a little bit better than last year?
Yeah, I just think it's a better fit, right? You don't need to have absolute better players if you have better fits. I don't think anyone thinks Kenneth Gainwell is a better running back than Najee Harris, especially if you got to run him 20 times a game. Right. But he and Jaylen Warren together will be a better fit for what Arthur Smith wants to do and what the Steelers are capable of blocking than what Najee Harris was. And I think that's a bonus. It's not absolute better, but it's when you're talking about adding a player, and I'm assuming this is going to be a small contract. I haven't seen details, but I'm assuming this is going to be a small contract. It's a 1-year deal. When you're talking about adding that kind of player, it can be a force multiplier when it's a perfect fit for your scheme. And I just feel like that's what this is.
I'm right with you. I think that that's what this is too. It's finding that guy there. And I think traditionally people think of when you have a team that wants to run the ball with a big, offensive line like they've invested into, you think of having that grinder running back, that physical type of guy. They could still find that guy in this draft class. They could find the Caleb Johnson. They could find the Damian Martinez. They could find those guys. But I think it's all about trying to build out the O-line to make it possible to create space for whatever type of running back that you have. And if you give yourself this option, like let's say they have Warren, they have a rookie, and they have Gainwell. Gainwell is your sort of like you said, the Darren Sproles type that you just have there for speed and to do other things. But then you throw in a rookie that you think could be the future starter for you. But then you also have Jaylen Warren who knows your offense. Eddie Faulkner's familiar with him. There's no guessing games there. There is a potential to find a sort of figure out who you do want to be your long-term answer there out of that group. And I think that it's an interesting idea for how they're going about it right now.
Yeah, I would think that the thing they're missing from those two guys is who do you want to have the ball on 4th and 1, right? Like that to me is the thing that like they don't have. They don't have somebody with some with some backside, with some sand in their shorts a little bit to stand up to that goal line push. So, but you got to have speed. You can't just be a big old, love Jerome Bettis, but he's not going to work in Arthur Smith's scheme. You got to be able to get to the edge to run wide zone, or you're only useful for 5 plays a game. And so it's got but I think a bigger guy that does have that speed to get outside that, and really it's more about change of direction than it is speed. Najee Harris was fast enough, but the reason they ran the toss a million times is because they just let him run straight and not have to run outside and then cut and then get upfield, which was what the problem was. So a bigger guy, I think, would be a really good compliment. I think that would make this a really awesome running back class.
And I think it could make it a very different look for how the Steelers want to go about running here. And I guess maybe running smarter, not harder, it would be the way that you'd go about it. So that looks like the Steelers' outlook at running back in the run game here. We'll see how they continue to build this out. I mean, ultimately here, I think the next move at running back is just waiting for the draft class and when to get it in this draft class. And we have a long time to talk about that. But I also want to talk about how this offense shapes with the receiver situation, because that was the big thing that happened at the top of the week. Alan, we do want to get your thoughts on the Metcalf trade and how things move forward. It was an interesting take put out there by a PFF guy, Trevor Sakema, and his thoughts on how the Steelers have handled the wide receiver position. We'll do that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. That's right, $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. And remember, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when you hit on your first bet of $5 or more. That's $200 in bonus bets when you sign up today at FanDuel and hit on your first bet of $5 or more. Be sure to visit FanDuel.com and get in on all the college hoops action all tournament long. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, I want to talk to you about, citing this person because, he's a football guy, and Trevor Sakema, Pro Football Focus. He talked about how he thinks it's bad. The trade for DK Metcalf was bad business unless they trade away George Pickens, particularly because they are too similar of types of wide receivers, not just in that they're vertical big guy threats that can go up and get the ball. Neither of them are big separators, but also in that they both commit a high rate of penalties in the NFL, and that could be a problem, and that they should trade away George Pickens here. Alan, I hear that, and I think it could be interesting if the Steelers were able to diversify their portfolio when it comes to the types of wide receivers. It'd be nice to have a route runner and a go-up-and-get-it guy like they had with Deontay Johnson and George Pickens a couple years ago. But you also need to have talent and the guys that can win overall. And I hear that there's a point to there, but I feel like the point of this is not that these guys are the long-term answers right now. These guys are just like the quarterback situation. This is a temporary crossover. They've committed to DK Metcalf for the long term, which probably means they're not going to commit to George Pickens for the long term, and they can see how it goes this year. What say you? Is this a bad plan to try to pair these guys up for the year, or do you think it should be a priority for the Steelers to move on from George Pickens sooner rather than later now that they do have DK Metcalf?
Well, okay, there's a lot here, and I'm going to agree and disagree with very important parts of it. In the ideal world, you would not have two wide receivers, your top two wide receivers, who duplicate each other's skill sets so much. That is not ideal. That's obvious. You don't want that. You want to have different types of weapons. Okay, so it's not ideal. But if you have Russell Wilson as your quarterback, who only really does one thing well in the passing game anyway, it's okay to have the guys that do that one thing. It's fine. Like, that's why I thought Mike Williams was a good idea at the trade deadline. I'm still not quite sure why it never worked out, because the idea of not allowing anybody to double team George Pickens because you got another one of him on the other side, to me, just makes a lot of sense. So I'm okay with that. And if you don't like it and you got a better option, okay, fine. But that's like not the real world. That's like theoretic, right? Theoretically, that's a bad idea, but it's not the way things work. Then you have the personality part of it. And I feel like that's real. Okay. Where like George Pickens has been this team's undisputed number one wide receiver for at least a year, and probably like pretty close to the number one receiver basically since he was drafted. Okay. In terms of the guy who gets the big targets, the guy who gets the deep shots, everything. The whole offense was basically designed around his ability. Okay. George Pickens is coming up a contract year. DK Metcalf just took his money. They're not going to extend George Pickens. He's also going to take his role, right? He's going to take that number one guy who's going to be the guy that things get designed around, that gets the important targets when the game is on the line. Is George Pickens going to be okay with that? Are the Steelers going to be able to make the personalities work? I think that's a very valid question that I don't know the answer to right now.
No, I hear you on that. I think it is a very valid question. It's something that the Steelers are contemplating, because again, you're still trying to build an offensive nucleus for the future. Like again, like when Ben Roethlisberger came into the Steelers locker room as a rookie, he didn't have to be a leader. You know why? Because they had Alan Faneca, they had Jeff Hardy, they had Hines Ward, who was a tone setter for the entire team. He was a leader. He set a tone. Jerome Bettis was there. Like there was culture on the offensive side of the ball. That's what I think they need to cultivate. And like, you know, if you got two guys that are kind of spazzing out and committing penalties because they're frustrated in the middle of the game, that's not the culture you want to always have. It, you know, you do want the bully culture. You do want to be like, we are better than you, and we're going to prove it to you. You want to be the bad boys. Like, look what the Eagles. They do not care. They will beat you up and they will tell you about it. But you also got to do it smartly. You can't be doing it in ways that are costing your team big time. Like Darnell Washington. Darnell Washington is obviously a guy that wants to be about that action and can be about that action. But you need guys that are top tier talent guys as well, that are setting that tone, that are saying like paying DK Metcalf. That is putting him in position to say like, hey, we want you to be a leader on this team. That's not just paying you temporarily money to hope that you turn out to be a good playmaker. We are entrusting you to be the leader and the face of this wide receiver room for the next several years. That is what I think the Steelers are trying to find right now. And I think they can find it. I think there's potential here. But man, Alan, I think that there's certainly, I get the football question of it, and I get the personality questions of it. But like you, and again, this points back to my reason why I think Russell Wilson over Aaron Rodgers makes a lot of sense. Less money, and now again, you got two deep ball guys, big deep ball guys that you can win with the moon balls down the sideline. And if you're hitting those, if you're having those guys on the field at the same time, you are forcing defenses every time that they think that you might have to pass to say, hey, are we keeping two safeties back? Or are we leaving our guys in single coverage? Because if you do that, one of them's going to toast you. And like you and I talked about all last year, going into last year, you know, why it was imperative to try to find a guy to pair with George Pickens was teams could start to say like, you know what, we're just going to focus on taking him away. Go ahead, beat us with Van Jefferson. If these two guys are still the wide receivers going into next season, you can't do that, because if you do that, one of them's going to get one-on-one, and you take advantage of that. And if Russell Wilson can manage that and make some big plays off of that, then all of a sudden you're having lighter boxes, 7-man boxes, and that allows the run game more space to become a bigger threat.
And the other part of this is, okay, let's say you believe the theory. Let's say you buy into the theory that this is a bad idea to have these two twin X receivers, and you want to, going to change it. Right? How do you impact that change? Well, you got to trade George Pickens. Well, I mean, some really good reporting from our friend Aditi Kinkabala this week, that basically the word is out in the NFL that if Mike Tomlin doesn't want a guy, hands off. Like, don't they learn from Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson? Don't get beat again. Like, then now fool me twice. Shame on me. Like
good point.
Okay, so if the Steelers are going to get rid of George Pickens, even if it is for an X's and O's reason, what we're talking about, the perception is going to be, oh, the Steelers are just getting rid of George Pickens because it's a problem, which means the return is not going to be what you think it should be for a player of George Pickens' caliber, which means in a year where it's not a very deep wide receiver draft class, it's going to be hard to get an equivalent player, even if you're like, okay, what we really need is like that traditional Z type, that separator, that Deontay Johnson guy who just go out there and get open on every play and we can throw it to him on third down. That'd be a way more better compliment for what we have. But where is that guy to be found?
Right.
Like, if you sign Cooper Kupp? I mean, maybe that works. I don't know. But I just don't. I think it's easy to say this is a bad idea, and it's a lot harder to come up with a way to make a better idea work.
No, that's where I'm at. I think that it's granted, a lot of the Steelers are not a team that's looking to become. They love to become a Super Bowl contender overnight, right? But they're not that right now. So you're trying to put pieces in place. You're trying to find answers for certain things, and that's where I think that they're saying, hey, like right now, this is a way to get a weapon. This is a way to build, moving forward. And you know, if you can't find that great deal for George Pickens, then you at least have the wide receiver for the future in place, and you're not scrambling next year to find wide receiver 1. Maybe you want to find wide receiver 2. Maybe you want to be more aggressive in finding wide receiver 2. But again, like, you know, George Pickens, you know, maybe his again, like George Pickens is a threat. And here's the other thing about it. I think Chase Claypool in his last year with the Steelers, when he got traded, he was not producing. I think George Pickens most likely will be able to produce for the Steelers this year. And like, if you get to the trade deadline and you decide you want to move on from him, I think he could still net you a good return. Now, granted, like you said, and the Didi said, teams are going to be not as foolhardy when it comes to that stuff, because they're going to be like, okay, why do the Steelers want to get rid of this guy? Because everyone's getting burned when they trade for these guys. But at the same time, I also don't think the Steelers necessarily need to do that, because if you have these guys for the rest of the year, maybe George does hit the market next year and and becomes a comp pick, you know, scenario for you, which doesn't help you in the draft, you know, situation for next year, but could help you in 2027.
Oh, sure it does, because if you know you're getting a 27 third round comp pick from George Pickens, then you can trade we'll trade our second and 27 to move up to that first round spot. Absolutely, it helps.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and if you're not going to get more than a third round pick if you trade him, as long as you can make the personalities work, just keep him. You'll get that third eventually anyway.
Interesting thought there. I like that idea. So
personalities could be difficult, and I think
it could be.
That is a very valid point that I don't think any of us really know the answer to right now.
And it's impossible to until you see them actually interact. That's not something you could study, right? Like that's something we can like guess about and speculate on. But that's just going to take time and them being together for us to actually see how it's going to work out. And personalities is also why I'm not 100% sure that Aaron Rodgers would be the best thing in that situation, because Aaron Rodgers is known to throw a lot of people under the bus regularly, and throw both those guys under the bus at some point, and I can see that being a major issue. But again, the Steelers, they got a lot of they still haven't decided on their quarterback situation. We'll see what that decision is as things play out. We'll keep it here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.
Predicting the King of Hearts is going to be the guy.
So that's Aaron Rodgers.
I don't know.
Okay. I was just saying there was a black king, there was a Hearts king. So
why is it always got to be about race, Chris?
I'm just saying you're the one that picked the cards. But anyways,
I didn't pick the colors of cards.
All right, but he's Alan Saunders. Alan, let people can find you, follow you, get more of your work.
Hey, Saunders _PGH on X, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. PGH Steelers Now, SteelersNow.com, and my podcast, Steelers Afternoon Drive and Steelers Morning Rush, anywhere you find podcasts on the Steelers Now YouTube page.
Absolutely. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the social media, same handle everywhere at Carter Critiques. Find me on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Also, read my work at the Pittsburgh Post at post-gazette.com. We're back tomorrow with more here on the Steelers, right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.